All right, so we're here with Chris Gabehart, crew chief of the number 11 car in the NASCAR Cup Series. Chris, man, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me, guys. Glad to be here.
I first want to kind of get the essence of who you are. I know your grandfather raced in the early 60s in the NASCAR Grand Touring Division. I know you raced go-karts at an early age, so clearly racing has been in your blood for a while. When did it change from wanting to be a driver to the crew chief side of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, I'm third generation racer. My grandfather, like you said, raced in the NASCAR ranks a little bit, and my dad actually raced go karts and local kind of sportsman car divisions at local tracks for a lot of years. And I'm 39 now, and I started racing driving go-karts when I was 10. So I've been in racing a long time and kind of advanced up through the ranks, doing some open wheel midget racing, and then late model racing regionally, and about the 2008-2009 season as a driver, I kind of had went as far as we could afford to go, and I had a fair amount of success doing it. And it was clear that I had this degree from Purdue with an engineering degree, and it was all about trying to advance my understanding of race cars. I always wanted to be in racing. There was never a doubt of that. I figured a mechanical engineering degree from Purdue couldn't hurt that. So it was always dual path between driving and school, and eventually, when the driving path had kind of reached the end that we could afford for it to go to, it was time for me to figure out how to start making money in racing rather than spending it. And 10 years later, here I am.
Yeah, and you've had a very successful career ever since. First time I talked to you was after the Daytona 500, your first start ever as a crew chief, and that was 2 years ago. So what have you learned in yourself as a crew chief and in this job since then?
Yeah, that's a good question. Since then, the biggest part that I have learned, obviously I had crew chiefing experience on the Xfinity side, but resources are just so much less at that level from a budget perspective. Yes, we're still part of Joe Gibbs Racing, but we just don't have the money to push the ball near as fast from a technology point of view. So coming over here, what I quickly realized was it's just so much about managing those resources and managing the people, and giving your guys what they need to succeed, and improving tools and improving communication amongst departments in terms of what we're learning at the racetrack and what we may need help with to be better. So is definitely a whiplash and acceleration of management and learning how to motivate people and kind of glue everybody together to push them in the same direction.
Your job has always fascinated me in how much you have to work with every single week. And the NBC broadcast pointed something out interesting to me, and I'm just trying to figure out the essence of what makes a car go fast. And they were talking about being able to trim the car out for downforce while minimizing drag. How much of that is part of your job, and how difficult is it to find that perfect balance?
Yeah, it's a huge part, it changes with the amount of horsepower you have and how big the track is. So, if you think of it from this perspective, if we were to take 1.5 or 2 mile racetrack and make it a straight line, eventually the cars would reach what's called terminal velocity. So for a given amount of horsepower and drag, they can only go so fast. So now you take that 1.5 and you turn it into an oval or a tri-oval like we have, and you introduce having to go through the corners with a sufficient amount of grip, and now you have to start balancing how much grip do I need downforce versus how slow the car is going to be in a straight line for overall elapsed time. And that's how you think in terms of trying to trim the car out to go as fast as it can go by itself. Well, then you got to consider, now I've got to put Denny in a pack of cars where the air is really turbulent and the grip level is changing quite a bit depending upon the situation he's in. And so now what's going to be the fastest? So since NASCAR has moved this 550 horsepower package and taken 200 horsepower away from us, and they've added a much bigger spoiler, that ratio has become much more critical to pay attention to than in years past, for sure.
Do you find different ways? Because I've learned that a race car from the beginning of the season, a competitive race-winning race car, if you go back later on in the season, would not be as competitive because of how much you learn in the season. So do you learn things on how to make the car faster with notes throughout the year?
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to what I was talking about on the Xfinity side, where we just don't have the budget, to produce the resources to change technology so quickly as we do over here. That, literally what we raced at a track 8 months ago may not be good enough anymore. Everybody continues to advance and find ways to improve their cars. And Goodyear will bring new tires that, kind of changes the equation. You think of Goodyear's job and what it means to us. There are a million variables that go into what we do, but there's a total of 20 square inches that touches the road, and those are Goodyears. That's what gets the cars through these corners. So when Goodyear changes, it changes part of the equation. We got to adjust to that, and it's a constantly changing sport, and it's a big part of what I love about it.
You mentioned camber, a kind of keyword that you hear a lot. For fans at home, could you explain what camber is?
Yeah, so camber is how much we lean the tire. You can think of it put in the footprint of the tire with respect to the racetrack. The more it's going to load the inside of the tire and produce a lot of grip early on, effectively in a run, is the way you can think about it. But it's very stressful for the tire because we're really leaning on the inside edge of the tire a lot. So if you get too aggressive with camber, it can definitely create a wear or a load issue that can eventually cause a failure.
I want to keep rolling down kind of the NASCAR 101 because this stuff has always really, really fascinated me. I know when I take people to the racetrack for the first time, one of the first things they notice is cars swerving back and forth under caution. I always say it's to warm up the tires, but is that exactly what they're doing?
Yeah, so for sure, each tire, and they're all a little different. The D codes that we run will prefer to operate at some level hotter than ambient, for sure. So when we first put the tires on, you're trying to work them up to temperature to get them closer into the primary optimum, or to the primary temperature range that they want to operate in. Now, because of our cars being so heavy and there being so much load, every tire that we run will eventually get too hot. So later in a run, they're not at optimum temperature anymore, and they're making a reduced amount of grip. But the restarts are so important, obviously, that you want to get them into that operating temperature range sooner, so the tire's making as much grip as it can for a restart. The other thing they're doing is trying to clean the tires off. So there's a lot of debris on the racetrack that, as the tire gets a little hot and sticky, can start to stick to the tire and reduce the effective footprint of the tire on the track. So the cleaner you make the tire by swerving, the more footprint that's on the track and ready to go for maximum grip.
People talk about tight and loose race car, and I know two things that you can do to adjust that are wedge and track bar, which do completely different things. With my minimum experience of making adjustments to a race car in a video game, I haven't quite figured out the difference between wedge and track bar. So maybe next time I go race in the video game, you can help me out. So what is the difference between raising the wedge versus raising the track bar?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a lot that goes into it, but effectively from a sort of engineering 101 perspective, you're changing the preload in the right front and the left rear tire from a static point of view, and then of course dynamic on the racetrack with respect to the left front and right rear tire. So that's called dynamic wedge or dynamic cross weight, depending upon who you talk to. It's the same thing. So the more you preload those tires, the more you're asking out of the front axle in terms of lateral with respect to the rear axle. Raising and lowering the track bar is more about lateral load transfer with the front axle with respect to the rear. The more you lower the track bar, the more the weight with lateral load is going to want to transfer across the rear. So there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the basics of the difference between the two.
I like it. All right, next time I go in the video game, I know what to do now.
It's that simple.
You know what? How about I'll just give you a call when I'm feeling loose on the
Sure.
NASCAR game.
Yeah, I'll dial you right in.
That sounds good. My last kind of NASCAR 101 question is oil and the use of the oil weight that you can use. I know at certain tracks, and I know we're not qualifying, but you would use lighter weight oils for just a couple laps on track versus a long run. So the type of oil you use, is there a different weight depending on what time of the weekend?
Yeah, so a lot like drag from an aerodynamic perspective can slow a car down. Friction is a big part of what makes horsepower and reducing that friction. So the lower viscosity oil that you run, and thus a cool oil versus a hot oil changes the viscosity as well. That reduces friction in the engine, or is a part of what reduces friction in the engine, which can increase horsepower. But the lower you make the friction of the oil, the less protected all the parts are inside the engine, and the more durability concerns can creep in, particularly with bearings and pistons and that kind of thing. So it's always a blend between getting the oil as thin as you can to reduce friction as much as you can and make power, versus durability and making these engines live 500 miles.
I appreciate you answering all my NASCAR 101 questions. It's always fascinated me, and I've always wanted to pick a brain of a crew chief. I want to finish off real quick. You guys have had a phenomenal season up to this point. So where is your head before the playoffs start and getting prepared for September?
Yeah, we, really for us, it's week in and week out, just trying to win the next race. I mean, you obviously have to have a bit of a macro approach and look forward several weeks in advance and start planning, car schedules and kind of lines of attack of how you want to go about each particular type of racetrack. You can't wait till the week of. There's certainly planning involved, but big picture, we really don't look at any race any different. We're going with a chance, with a chance to win, with a sponsor the caliber of FedEx and Toyota and all the resources that Joe Gibbs Racing provides us. So we're really in a fantastic position and really lucky to have all those resources. So for us, every race is the same. We're figuring out how to go win it, and that makes it really easy. With a guy like Denny, there's no track that I feel like we can't win at. It's just a matter of optimizing our week, and we'll have a shot at it.
Well, you guys surely make it look easy every single weekend. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to talk a little bit of NASCAR 101 and everything that's going on with the 11 team.
Yeah, no worries, man. I enjoyed it. Thanks.